View from the Gutters presents Back Matter, Episode 18. Welcome to Back Matter, the show where we discuss the wider world of comics and have conversations that we don't normally have room for on our ordinary show. On this episode of Back Matter, our hosts discuss Emerald City Comic Con 2016, followed by an interview with Bryan May. To skip directly to the interview portion of the show, skip to 13 minutes, 8 seconds.
So this Emerald City felt it was probably the busiest it's ever been, but I think they reorganized things so the aisles were bigger, so it did not feel as crowded.
Yeah, I haven't seen the numbers yet, but I think the fourth day really helped.
Yes.
And I think that they did some reorganizing that made it feel a lot more organic. It was a lot easier to get from place to place.
Yeah, absolutely. It was almost entirely positive. I couldn't get off on Friday. Kirby went Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I just went Saturday and Sunday, and I think that was kind of the sweet spot for me. I would have liked to go Friday so I could get seeing the talent out of the way and see some panels on Saturday, but I got to talk to Ben Templesmith, who told me that there's a possibility there could be more Fell. He said if Warren Ellis will write it, I'm already drawing it. So I was like, well, now I love you more than I did before. We also had a really great, just a great conversation in general. Really, just a wonderful human being, Ben Templesmith, and also just impeccably dressed.
Did he have a bow tie?
No, he had a narrow black tie,
Nice.
and a black suit with a white shirt, which I think is all you need. I had a great conversation with Ryan Brown, the creator of God Hates Astronauts. Tremendously nice person.
He was a sweetheart.
He really was. I bought his Kickstarter book, Blast Furnace. If you liked God Hates Astronauts, do whatever you need to. Sell your house pets. Take out a second mortgage on your fucking house. Find a copy of Blast Furnace. Get your hands on it and read it. You will not be sorry. Because it is all the craziness of God Hates Astronauts. And then some. It is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's more or less frightening that drugs seem to play no part in his creative process.
No.
That's just how his brain is.
Well, and what he said was, I'm just doing what I find funny. And I'm like, then you can never really go wrong. Because at least you find it funny. And I find it funny too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we got to talk to Adam Warren, found out some cool stuff about Empowered. The number one thing of which is that it is now being put up online. I think at empoweredcomic.com. I will double check that link and post it on the Facebook page.
Awesome.
But it is being put online, annotated with commentary by Adam Warren. And he said sometimes exhaustive commentary. So I think that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I got him to sign my copy of Empowered Unchained, which has a pull quote from us on the back of the cover.
It does indeed. It does indeed. And he also told us that while there will not be an Empowered volume this year, there will be 2 next year, or they are attempting to do 10 and 11. So that's cool. But I did have a moment standing in the middle of this con, kind of, I think, waiting to meet up with somebody, where I was just like, there's just so much shit going on here. There's so many things coming out. I can't possibly fucking keep up with it. Like, even if all I was doing was working at a comic book store, not that, I mean, like, even if that was my life, right? I could not keep up with it all. And I don't work at a comic book store, like, I've got a lot of other shit going on. And it made me kind of sad because one of the things I talked to Ben Templesmith about, and he said something that we fucking said, which is we were, talking about how great it is that everybody is doing everything with comics. There's all kinds of comics, more comics than there have ever been before. And he goes, it's a medium, not a genre. And of course, then I was just like, well,
Well, I think that that's probably one of the most self-evident things that somebody could say about comic books.
Yes, but it's
not to diminish his statement in any way.
Yeah, no, and I think, I think that there are still some people that think that it's a fucking genre.
Yeah. Well, those people are not paying attention.
As a genre.
Yeah, and so I thought it was good. It was good. I got a lot of swag, and I got a free image tote, so I can be like my hero Kit, who's not here, and I can just put things in a tote.
Yep.
Totes.
Yeah, totes my goats. So yeah,
Totes McTotes.
I went Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then I went to a couple of like after parties and stuff as well. First off, Kieran Gillen is a delight. He is just hands down an absolute delight to hang out with. That man is so sweet and so enjoyable. We were standing outside Goth Prom smoking, and he is just so much fun to talk to, and he's so nice and he's so genuine. And I kind of fell off reading The Wicked and Divine, but I'm going to start picking it up again.
Have you read Phonogram?
Because of how much I love talking to that man. What was that?
Have you read Phonogram?
Not yet.
Okay. You absolutely should.
If you like The Wicked and Divine, I would also recommend.
And then the exciting news that I was freaking out over. Allison from Out of the Fridge and I heard about a week ago this sort of unsubstantiated rumor that Gerard Way was going to be at Emerald City. And because there was no proof to it, we were kind of keeping it between ourselves, like not announcing it on anything or anything like that. But we were both freaking out about it. The rumor was that he was going to be at Emerald City and that he is taking over Vertigo. So she goes to the DC Roadshow. He is unfortunately not there, but they announced that Young Animal will be coming out and is basically Vertigo 2, and that he will be writing Doom Patrol, and there's a number of amazing former Vertigo titles that are going to be coming out under this new imprint. And I am so excited about that because not only do I love My Chemical Romance, but I love Gerard Way as a writer, and I love him as an ideas man. And I think him leading this imprint is going to be a really exciting thing for DC. And I'm just thoroughly stoked.
Awesome. I just went for Saturday. It was a pretty low-key con for me this year. I got to meet and talk with a number of artists that I just absolutely adore. Jake Wyatt, who does a webcomic called Necropolis, Melissa Paliukia, who does Above the Clouds, which I talked about on Singles Club. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet Faith Erin Hicks, but I did pick up a copy of her new graphic novel, which is the first in a series of graphic novels called The Nameless City, which shares a design aesthetic with Avatar: The Last Airbender, and in fact has a quote from one of the creators of that series on the cover. It's a really, really great all-ages book that I absolutely recommend that everybody check out. And then we also did the View from the Gutters fan meetup, along with Arc Reactions and our friends the Fake Geek Girls podcast. And we got to meet Mike and Bryan May and
Louis Whitford,
Whitford,
who strolled around with me for a while, and we had a great time.
Yeah, and it was a really great day. You know, I didn't push myself too hard to see too many things, go to too many panels. I just kind of cruised the floor, checked out some deals, picked up some books, you know, talked to some folks and told them how much I love their stuff. I got to meet Janelle Aslan, who does Fresh Romance, and I'm going to be getting the first volume of that when it prints in July, because I was a Kickstarter backer. And yeah, it was just a good time. It was a lot less stressful than Emerald City has been for me in previous years, and I feel really good about that. And of course, I'm looking forward to Rose City in the fall, because that's kind of my get out and meet the indie crowd kind of con, because there are a lot more indie people there at Emerald City. Like, it can be just such oppressive people that it's kind of hard to find people and have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So well, I know Kit, who is unfortunately not here tonight. She had some amazing conversations with a bunch of people, picked up a lot of things. I got to talk to a lot of creators. But yeah, this con was actually much less stressful than I thought it would be. I cosplayed for 2 out of the 3 days. And like the first day, Friday was like mostly photo shoots and things like that, which was fun, but it was also a little frustrating. It was like, I really just want to get to the con floor and do things there and not necessarily be outside in the hot sun doing 30 different poses for the next 3 hours. But other than that, yeah, it was really wasn't stressful much at all. There was a point where I screamed at somebody, but that was only once this year, so I feel like that's a pretty good record for me. And it wasn't even like directive screaming, it was just me making a screaming sound in the direction of somebody. So I didn't give anybody like a dressing down or anything, so that was really nice.
And I think that the cosplay scene was really on point this year. There were a lot of Rays.
Ray won the day, I think.
Yeah,
Ray definitely won the day. It was a very low stress con, and I'll tell you why. It's because we were all doing our own things. Like I remarked to Kirby several times because we just basically we got there together. We pretty much hung out the whole time, and we left together. There was only one time when we were separated, so we didn't have to meet up. It was just very kind of, we're gonna do this. You know, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And it was really cool. I mean, I got to see everybody I wanted to, and a few people I didn't realize. Picked up a copy of Little Gotham from Dustin Nguyen, and I'm fucking spacing on his name. It's fucking adorable though. It's like on the second page there is a picture of Batman with the bat cowl on, but he's wearing like a professor outfit, and he's teaching Damien about Halloween, and it is amazing. And the minute I saw it, I was like, I love this book. I'm gonna hug this book when I sleep at night, because we had a great conversation about how we don't need more Batman punching people. It's okay. We can have Batman doing cool stuff too.
Like dressing up like a professor.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just great. Dustin Nguyen's art fills me with joy.
I do adore that man's art.
Yeah. So it was good, man. It was a really good con. I am looking forward to Rose City, because that'll be right before my wedding. So I won't be stressed out at all.
No, not at all.
Nope.
And I'm sure I won't be like freaking out and like biting my nails down till they bleed and pulling my hair out at all.
All right. I hope you enjoyed our reactions to Emerald City Comic Con. Now we have a follow-up interview that I did with Bryan May during Emerald City. And for those of you who don't know that name, Bryan has been a longtime listener of the show. He's been a supporter on our Patreon fund. And for the last year, he's been working on breaking into comics as a writer. So I thought it would be interesting to sit down with him and talk about his experiences thus far working in the comics industry. Welcome to View from the Gutters. I'm Tobiah Panshin.
And I'm Bryan May.
Yes, the illustrious Bryan May, whose name you've probably heard more than once on our opening credits, is actually here in Seattle for Emerald City Comic Con.
Lovely, lovely Seattle.
Yeah, it is a beautiful day. It's mid-60s, it's sunny, it is everything that is wonderful about spring in the Northwest. But yeah, we're here at Emerald City, and so I thought that I would take the opportunity to sit down with Bryan, because he is actually trying to break into the comics industry as a writer. And I thought that that would be something interesting to talk about a little bit and kind of get Bryan's view as someone new to the other side of the table in comics and kind of see what his perspective is. So I thought that maybe we could start out talking about kind of how you first got into comics. Like, how old were you when you first started reading comic books?
So, you know it's a really weird first comic book to read? Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. It's my dad. He was born in the 50s, so he was at the right age for the original Marvel boom, the Stan Lee era. Mm-hmm. And he got into it then, and he sort of carried that throughout his whole life. Was into alt comics enough in the 80s. Like, he read Zot, I believe, when Zot was actually a deal. And got a copy of Understanding Comics when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and that's just been sitting on my parents' bookshelf forever. I read it over and over again. I didn't think my dad considered this, but he just never bought any more comics. That was literally the only one on the shelf. And from there, you graduate to newspaper comics, Garfield specifically, because for some reason libraries love to stock those Garfield trade paperbacks.
For me, it was, oddly enough, Doonesbury.
Doonesbury,
when I was
another
a kid,
good one.
I mean, Calvin and Hobbes, love it. Far Side, Bloom County, all great. But for some reason, I loved like old Doonesbury collections from the 70s where they're talking about like Watergate and, they've got the commune set up for the first time, Walden Puddle, and I have no idea why I loved it. It was just so relaxed and everybody was really friendly all the time. I don't know, but it spoke to me.
I definitely didn't understand the politics of Doonesbury when I read it, but I was endlessly fascinated by his decision to never draw the president. He would only, if they were just some other politician, he would draw them. But with the president, he'd always just show the White House and a little butterfly flying past every single time.
Yeah.
And that was a creative decision that really spoke to me for some reason. Past that, it was newspaper comics, it was manga. Ranma 1/2 was a big obsession of mine for a while.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Love Hina after that. And then... really, American comics, I had random issues of Wolverine and Daredevil and Spider-Man when I was a kid from late 90s, early 2000s, so like around the time Ultimate Marvel was starting. But I didn't get really into them until I read Runaways by Brian K. Vaughan, I think in around 2006, 2007.
Okay.
For some odd reason, my high school in the middle of Central Texas decided to have a small comic book section, and Runaways was if you never read an American comic and you read the description, teenagers discover their parents are supervillains, that's immediately appealing to me, at least. That's a twist that it just turns the entire idea on its head, and maybe once you get into comics and, you've read a few things like it before, but that was there were ideas in there. Like I remember specific lines about fan fiction of teenagers living in the Marvel universe. Like, of course they're going to write fan fiction about their favorite superheroes. Of course they're going to play MMOs as their favorite superheroes. Like, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they think they're as cool? So ideas like that spoke to me pretty immediately. And then from there, I got into Y the Last Man, and that's what I consider my comic, the inspiration for me saying...
That was the moment where you're like, yeah, I love comic books.
Yeah, that was the one. I devoured it in 2 or 3 days. And I've argued with you guys about this because I have such rose-colored glasses for that series. Like, I don't see the problems everyone else has with the endings, but I get it. I get it.
I found the ending a little bit lackluster, but if you want to talk about people talking shit about Y the Last Man, that is entirely on Mr. Joe Preti's side of the table. I have that collection. Like, I like that book. I really love Pia Guerra's art. I think that it is an important work to understand. I don't know what Joe's fucking problem is with that.
And I'm sure there's deeper subtext problems that I didn't see when I was a 16-year-old kid, but...
Oh, well, I was reading it when I was in college, like my first year, it was coming out. I think I started picking it up around issue like 18.
Mm-hmm.
So it had been going for a year and a half at that point. And, it was so different from everything else that was coming out. And I think that it is still different from most things that were coming out. And that's kind of talking about a time when the word feminist is still a dirty word. And you have people like, and man, I don't want to say the wrong person's name because I'm going to talk some shit here, but the guy who was writing Wonder Woman saying, I don't see it as a feminist comic or Wonder Woman as a feminist character. And then you have Brian K. Vaughan 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier, doing Y the Last Man, and it's like, this is literally about a world of women. And sure, there's some problematic elements of it, given that it decided to focus on the one fucking dude on Earth in this entire world of women, but that's by no means to say that it is a bad comic book, and I think that there's a lot of really great material in there.
Right.
That's still important to the conversation that we're having about comic books today.
Yeah.
A conversation that a lot of people are still not willing to engage in.
And actually, now that you say that, I guess part of the reason why The Last Man drew me in so much is it was so far removed from the machismo and just overly flexing dudes of superhero comics, which, I appreciate me some superhero comics, but there's there's definitely a limit to how much of that I can take in a short amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually kind of leads me into the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is in relation to some of the comics that you pitched for the show.
Ah, yes.
I mean, we've got Change by Alice Cott, and I'm not coming up immediately at the top of my head with some of the other ones.
I did Ant Colony
by
Michael DeForge.
My Friend Dahmer.
Yeah.
You've pitched some really weird books, some very surreal stuff. And so I guess I was kind of interested to know what it is about comics that interests you specifically, kind of within the context of having pitched so many sort of surreal or off-the-wall books to us.
I like a book that can surprise me. Surprises come in a lot of different ways. I have never been a person who is strictly interested in a story because of an initial hook or premise. I'm always more interested in how it plays out, where it goes. So something like Ant Colony, I guess, that speaks to me because it takes really, I mean, you guys didn't end up reading it, but it takes up a really human approach to this very strange idea of these ants. And when you read the book, these guys have just completely normal conversations as this absolutely bizarre and alien landscape is sort of crumbling around them. They're talking about like whose turn it is to go get groceries from down the lane as they're like in line to go deposit their seed inside the vagina of the spider goddess. And there's there's a cross point between the reality of a situation and the bizarreness of a situation. Like, and when you get that perfect percentage wise, it just really works for me. Now something like Change by Alice Cott is more about, I like to see how far comics can get pushed. And even when I pitched that book, I wouldn't have ever told you that like it's one of my favorite books. I think it's a complete success. I just find it a very interesting book that takes a very different approach to comic book storytelling. And I like to consider all approaches. And I know you're not, you don't actually read much of like the indie like drawn in quarterly like Fantagraphics type of books, right?
Yeah, well, there's a certain level of like kind of the underground comics, things that are a little bit more surreal, that are a little bit sketchier, that are kind of much more about how you feel about it or what sort of emotions the imagery can evoke over necessarily telling what I would call a coherent story. Mm-hmm. And like there's a certain point where that path just holds no interest to me.
Right.
Years and years and years ago, I was talking to Brant, and he said that I was a plot whore. And I think that is ultimately true. Like, I am all about the story. I want to know what happens next. I want you to tell me like a ripping yarn where stuff is happening and people are finding out things and action is happening. And like, I love it when there's really great character development there and I'm surprised by the story and all those things. But at the end of the day, I want something to happen. And that's what I'm into comics for.
Yeah, and I get that. Because the comics that are actually my favorite are the ones that use big ideas that push the plot forward constantly. But I'm just, and maybe part of this is just because I have an obsession with Grant Morrison, but I just like to see how many different ways a comic can be pushed forward. And I don't, necessarily think they all succeed 100%, but I'm interested just to see how it plays out because they tried it.
Yeah, and I think Grant Morrison is kind of the perfect nexus, because on one end of the spectrum you have like All-Star Superman, where it's like he's telling a coherent story, things are happening, I love it. And then you kind of got the Invisibles, and I really love the Invisibles, even though there are moments where it kind of dips into that area where I'm like, okay, Grant, you done too many drugs, you done lost me, I don't know what's happening here, bring it back a little bit. And then he goes off into something like, what's the one he's working on now? The 18th something.
Oh boy, I've lost track of
Yeah,
them.
which is just from the little bit that I read, it's like, wow, Grant, I don't know what you're doing here, and you're scaring me a little bit. Yeah, okay, that's cool. Okay, I'm gonna go over here now. I'm gonna go back to where the normal comics are. Because I mean, he kind of runs that gamut between just like batshit insane, like look at all the ideas I have, and then actually like telling a story with those ideas.
Yeah, I can't even remember the last time he actually was just set out to tell a normal story. I've heard good things about Nameless. But.
There's one that kind of, I think, flew under a lot of people's radars that came out last year called Annihilator.
Yes, I did see that. Legendary Comics.
Yeah, and I actually enjoyed Annihilator. It kind of hewed that line that The Invisibles hewed, where it got a little bit crazy, but it managed to keep it under control for the most part. And then, he followed it up with whatever it is that he's working on now that I'm not recalling the full title of. And I read like the first issue of it, and I'm like, I can't deal with this. There are too many comics that I love coming out right now. Like, this is honestly a problem that I have a lot. Like, there's so much good stuff coming out now that I can't even stand to read the okay stuff. Because it's like, well, I could read something that's okay, and maybe I have to work to it, or I can just go to the thing that I know I'm going to love, and it's going to give me everything I want, and I don't have to work real hard for it.
Oh, I totally get that. I mean, one of the things that kind of blew me away when I went to Emerald City this year is there are a lot of comics that I totally missed out on last year. Like, just completely under my radar. I'm not looking at the right news sources anymore or something. But, once you start putting your money into making your own comics rather than buying other people's comics, sacrifices have to be made, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And now I'm starting to realize, like, when I read interviews with creators, when the question is, what have you been reading lately? And they're like, I don't have time to read comics. I get it now. There isn't time if you're making them.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a bummer, but...
Yeah, you kind of have to be willing to kill your baby in terms of sacrificing the thing that you love to make the thing that you love. And like, I mean, even talking to my father, who I mentioned is a science fiction writer, I don't know the last novel that he read. It was probably sometime back in the 70s. Maybe I don't know. Like, he reads lots of nonfiction. He loves movies, watches them all the time, listens to lots of music. But when it comes to sitting down and reading a fiction novel, I have no idea when the last time he actually read one was, because that is like the thing that he does. And this is something that I see over and over and over again. Like, I've asked comic creators, like, what are you reading? What do you like? And they're like, I don't know. Like, I'm so up my own butt about what I'm doing. Like, I don't have time to focus on what anyone else is doing.
You just can't. You can't lose your train of thought. Just you're in the middle of writing 8 issues, 22 issues, 4-issue miniseries. It has to come out, because it's going to get, whatever you start reading, it's going to start influencing you. It's going to make you either question or change your tactics somehow. It's just got to keep the eye on the prize.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit and kind of talk about your experiences as somebody who is, and I hate to use the phrase breaking into the industry, because I think that's such an outdated mode of thought when it comes to comics.
I feel like when you say breaking into the industry, there's definitely like this implication of, once I get my unnamed superhero contract,
right.
I did it. I got it. I'm done. And that's definitely, not necessarily a career path everyone's going for anymore.
Well,
or even a necessary career path anymore.
It's so different now. Like, you talk about, 20 or 30 years ago, like breaking into comics, like, how do I get Marvel or DC to publish me? Like, that's the thing. And there are so many paths now that don't ever go through those doors. Like, I'm not sure what the correct term would be, but breaking in seems wrong-headed at this point.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's almost like, sticking your head up above the clouds, getting people to work with you, getting noticed, cultivating an audience. Gardening.
Gardening.
There we go.
They like
gardening
that.
your way into comics. But you have been writing comics. When we talked briefly last year at Emerald City, you were kind of, coming to your first comic convention. You had an entire suitcase full of comics that you were getting signed. And then when I talked to you like maybe 6 months ago, you had said that you had started writing things, you were looking for artists, and that kind of your plan was to come to Emerald City with a portfolio of things to show to people. And so I'm kind of interested what your experience has been, both in terms of self-publishing your own comics, but then also in kind of talking with editors or showing off your portfolio, what kind of reaction you've gotten. And I know that's a lot to kind of break off. So maybe let's just say, okay, you've sat down, you've written a comic script.
Right.
Where did you go from there?
Right. Well, so with every person who makes comics, the first comic you hear of them is probably something along the lines of their 30th or 40th comic. There's dozens of projects that they've been working on for years that never got any notice or never got finished or something or other. I've been pumping scripts out since I was 17 years old. Basically a year after I got into comics, I just decided I'm going to do this for no real reason whatsoever other than the medium spoke to me. Eventually you learn, after just writing for a while and finally accepting, okay, everything earlier than this point is a total, I can totally just count that as a wash. I did it for practice. Now let's do it again. And this time I'm going to finish. I'm going to find an artist that is going to work with me. And more than likely, most people will start too big. I definitely tried to start too big. My eyes, everyone's eyes are bigger than their stomach. Your first series, have you ever, by perchance, looked at a website for people finding comic book collaborators?
I have Reddit/comic book collabs.
Good thing you mentioned them because they're coming up again in a minute.
Okay.
But if you just troll there for a while, not troll, lurk. If you lurk there for a while, you will find dozens of posts that say something like, starting a new superhero comic, it's going to be 70 issues long. It's going to be a huge epic. It's going to change the industry. And people have these huge, grandiose plans, and it doesn't sound like they've read a comic that was published within the last 10 years. And you get excited. You have this idea, and you want to go for it, but it just doesn't ever plan out. So once you're past that stage and you finally realize, okay, I'm going to have to scale this back if I want to build up to the thing I actually want to do, then a lot of people will get stuck finding an artist. And the way I did mine is I was using our comic book collabs, but I didn't start with a pitch. I actively looked for artists who were within my price range. And yes, pretty much if you want a good artist, you have to pay. That's not a yes to you. That's a yes to anyone listening, because some people are convinced that they can do it without paying anybody. And unless you're really lucky and you know someone who has a very specific kind of work ethic, it's not going to happen. I found artists within my price range that had a style that I thought that I could make the most out of. Not necessarily that it was my favorite style, not necessarily that I thought it was the most unique style, but just something that I thought I had a story for them and I thought it would work together with. And I'd find those guys and I would email them, I'd ask for a quote, I would ask what they were willing to do, and then I would say, I want to build the story from the ground up with you. Because you're always going to get the best performance out of an artist when you are telling a story that they are equally excited about as you are. So if you say I have a sci-fi story and then you unload it on them and it's all about robots and you find out, I don't like drawing robots, well, you kind of just, the collaboration is probably dead right there, and that's not something that you want to end up doing. Let's, I'm going to plug my book, Soup Brain #1. And for anyone listening,
we'll throw up a link to your website or whatever you want.
Sure. I'm just going to say it now then. For anyone listening, you can find it at bdmay.tumblr.com. That's a placeholder while my real website gets built. And the first story on there, Mac Radwinski, I don't actually know where he's from. I think he's from Poland, but I I found him on our comic book collabs. He had some really lovely sample pages, some really great fantasy art, and I just looked at it and I was like, I think this would look really cool if I took his art and put it in like a cyberpunk sort of semi-future world. And I wrote to him and I asked him, would you be interested in doing something like that? And he was into it, and from there I wrote the script. I wanted to make sure that the idea was completely copacetic to them before I moved forward.
I mean, that just to me, from my own personal experience, that sounds like exactly the right way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, I guess, like I said, you gotta have a team that's excited about the goal. Because if it's just there's this weird mentality, I think, about like first time creative people where there's a lot of credit that they want to take for the idea, and I am. It's weird to even just describe yourself as modest, but I don't know. I don't even want to say that I created the comics. I just want to say I worked on them. From there, I found a colorist. He had a Tumblr website. Again, I looked for people who had work that. I mean, you know your own tastes. So when you're looking at artists and colorists, if you don't respond to the art, then more than likely the audience that's going to read the work is also not going to respond to the art. So you just kind of have to use your own internal judgment about who's going to look good. And with colorists, you kind of have to do some mental math. Like, I kind of stared at the finished pencils while I was looking at the guy's coloring samples, and in my head combining them and seeing, is this going to work together? And you make the judgment call and hopefully it works out okay. But you can't really have you could ask for a sample page, I guess, but you're still going to have to pay him for that sample page.
Okay.
And then letters, honestly, find one guy you like and use them for everything. Because if you find a good letterer, you're good. If you find a good letterer that you can afford to pay consistently, then you're good. Because, usually one letterer will be able to handle several different kinds of styles. And I found this great guy named Jamie. I think he's out of UK. He's doing some great work. He's a writer himself, so I hope he does good.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal when you find somebody that you can work with, and I love how much things have changed in terms of being able to collaborate with people from all over the place. And you hear about teams where it's like you've got one person in on the west coast of the United States, and somebody in England, and somebody in Poland. Stepan Sage of Death Vigil and Teen Witchblade and all that stuff. He lives in, I think, Hungary, or Slovenia or Slovakia or something like that, in Eastern Europe.
Eastern Bloc, yeah.
Yeah. And like he's had this, modestly at least successful comics career in the last few years, doing a lot of really great stuff, living in Eastern Europe, but publishing all these comics in the United States. And that's just a thing that people do now, and it's not considered weird. And I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic how it's kind of just sort of coalesced into a global culture that just sort of meets right in American comics. Or we get lucky enough to, reap the rewards of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to have to look up the guy's name. I'll edit it in later, but I was speaking with the guy. He's the current artist on Superman, Lois and Clark.
His name for the record is Lee Weeks.
The DC comic where it's the pre-New 52 Superman who's been kind of imported into the 52 universe, and it's him and Lois and their son, and they're hiding out. He is from the same area where I grew up, in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, and he is working with Scott Hanna, who also lives in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. I actually met him years and years ago at a panel at my local library in Doylestown, and the two of them are working together on this comic, and they live like close enough that they just drive pages down like between each other. And I'm like, wow, that is like so not the way that things are done anymore.
Like, it used to be that they'd be, like, mailing pages all over the place or whatever. Or they'd be working in the same office or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not the way it is anymore. And it was so funny to hear not only that this guy is from where I grew up, but that he's working with somebody else who lives within driving distance of him. And they can just run the pages down when he's done penciling them and have Scott ink them and stuff. And that's, I don't know, it's really cool.
How comparatively easy it is to hand over comic pages in the modern age. It's just one more reason why there's not really an excuse. If you want to make comics, you can make comics.
Yeah, I mean, shit, go on comic book collabs and find somebody who's in your price range and hey, you're a comics professional now. Congratulations, you did it. You broke in.
Exactly.
You're success. Go get a booth at your local convention and hawk your wares.
So I believe so the other half of that question was about this convention itself, was it not?
Well, the second half, and I'm going to get to Emerald City itself, but just curious about what the reception has been in general to your comics so far. If you've gotten much feedback about them.
Not a ton. There is definitely a struggle to actually get it into attentive people's hands to get them to crack open the book. And I was aware of that, and that's a struggle that almost every creative industry has to deal with. Like, I've been in bands before. Nobody cares about your album. Mm-hmm. They only care,
or your podcast.
So you just gotta. It's a patience thing, and I've gotten into the hands of a few people. Like, I found at least one editor who was willing to take it back home with him, and hopefully I'll hear back from him. I don't know, probably not. I'm not counting on it, but the general reception that I've gotten has been mostly positive, and most people also understand, like, oh, this is a first attempt. I'm not necessarily asking for super critical feedback at this point, because there are problems that I see that I want to fix first, and once I fix the problems that I see, then I want to know what other people think the problems are. So, but yeah, generally pretty good. I'm feeling really good about just having it out there, and it's just such a big first step to even get it finished in the first place. So I'm still feeling the glow of even getting the accomplishment done.
Good deal. And so I guess kind of my last question is, relative to Emerald City Comic Con, coming in from the perspective of a creator and a new creator, rather than a fan who's there to get stuff signed and say hi to your creator and be like, oh, I love your stuff. Like, what has your experience been at Emerald City this year from that perspective? Like, if you had the opportunity to talk to many other creators, to put things in their hand or get any kind of feedback from them?
I got a few. I won't name drop, but I did. There were a few creators that I specifically wanted to approach and say, I've been following your work for a number of years. I definitely make it a point to let them know, like, I'm not expecting you to take this home with you, but if you could just, like, flip through a few pages and tell me, like, does anything catch your eye in there or anything. And generally, they've been very helpful. And one creator specifically gave me some general advice, which is basically try to track down an editor and see if you can convince them to read it. And let me tell you, trying to track down an editor is hard at a convention. They don't like to make themselves known. They're probably wearing a name tag that just says the name of the company they're working for. And they're generally hidden somewhere. Like, I know that there are a ton of Boom Studio editors at the con, but I haven't seen a single one of them. Or if I have, I was very unaware that they were a Boom Studios editor. Beyond that, like, so my general tactic, maybe not the smartest tactic, but I have a little box and I have a sign, and I'm trying to entice people with free comics, and I just really want to if I can get rid of all the comics I brought with me before I leave here, I will consider that a success. And I think that's about as much of a success as I could possibly make it on this trip.
All right, fair enough. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with me. It's been very, I guess I want to say illustrative, to kind of get that, 1 foot in the door perspective from somebody who's actually doing something that I think that a lot of people have thought about doing and never had the wherewithal to do. And it sounds like you really have a good grounding in what you want to do and how you want to do it, and you're moving forward, which, just on a personal level, I think is impressive.
Why, thank you. Yeah, the big question now is how do I fund issue number 2, but hopefully I'll figure that out in the next few months.
Mortgage your house. That's how most people do it.
Right.
Well, before we wrap up, were there any last things that you wanted to say or any questions that you wanted to ask yourself?
I don't got much. For anyone who's listening to this, thinking about doing it, just do it. Stop thinking about it. You've had plenty of time to think about it. There's this idea, I can't remember what it's called. It's called idea debt. That's it. And idea debt is the worst thing you can have as a creative person. You don't want to just be thinking about the things you're going to do. You should just be doing them.
Yep. If you've ever listened to any of our panels, and we've done a couple of them, talking about the genesis of the podcast and what it's been like, I think everybody up and down the row has said, just do it. Like, you're going to suck at first, but just do it.
Yeah.
You'll get better as you go. You're never going to get better just thinking about it, so just do it.
Yeah, you can't worry about sucking.
Just start, turn off your brain, and just go. And don't worry about what happens, because you're going to suck, and you're going to suck, and everybody else knows you're going to suck. So just suck for a while, and then you won't suck as bad.
Exactly.
And then eventually you'll be okay. And that's all anybody's really asking for at the end of the day, is to just be okay.
Thanks a ton for having me on. This was a joy.
It has been a pleasure. I'm going to pretend to shake your hand even though we're standing like way too far away. All right. And to all your listeners out there, thank you for listening, and we will see you again real soon on a regular episode. Bye, everybody. You want to say bye?
Yep, sure. Goodbye, everybody.
This has been a production of View from the Gutters. Thank you to this month's show sponsors, Jeremy Ballard, Chris Bianculli, Curfy Gonzo, Becca Lewandowski, and Addison Appleby. We hope you'll join us next time for discussion of our selected title. In the meantime, we encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. Become a sponsor of the show at patreon.com/viewfromthegutters. Like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we upload old episodes, as well as video content including panels and other events. Or leave us a review on iTunes, as it does help new listeners find the show. We encourage you to send any questions, comments, or recommendations you may have to contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep reading.